The green terminal light on my desk hummed in the quiet of my home office just outside Houston. It was 2:20 in the morning on a Tuesday when the phone rang, breaking the silence of the night. I saw the caller identification on the screen and felt a cold knot form in my stomach. It was Richard Croft, the Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard Construction Corporation. For 19 years, I had been the Senior Project Director for Vanguard, overseeing our largest infrastructure contracts. Right now, I was in the middle of managing 4 massive pipeline construction sites across Texas and Oklahoma. Together, those projects represented $1.6 billion in active contracts. I was 58 years old, and after spending 14 years building bridges in hazardous zones for the Army Corps of Engineers, I had dedicated nearly 2 decades of my life to making Vanguard the most trusted contractor in the energy sector. I picked up the call, expecting a crisis at one of the night shifts. Instead, Richard's voice came through cold, detached, and calculated. He did not ask about the safety clearance for the critical energy pipeline in Odessa that was scheduled for inspection by 8 in the morning. He did not ask about the crews working the overnight shift in Corpus Christi or the weather warning heading toward our team in Tulsa. He simply told me that Vanguard was undergoing an immediate organizational restructuring. My position as Senior Project Director was being eliminated effective immediately. The call lasted exactly 5 minutes and 10 seconds. I sat there in the dim light, listening to Richard explain that my duties were being consolidated under the new Vice President of Strategic Development, a man named Bradley Miller. Richard called it a streamlined approach to infrastructure management. I knew what that meant. It was corporate double talk for replacing experienced oversight with someone cheaper who had never stood on a wet trench in his life. I tried to explain the stakes. We had critical environmental inspections scheduled for the morning, and the night crews needed active oversight. Richard dismissed my concerns, saying they had complete confidence in their transition planning. He told me I needed to transfer all system access credentials to Bradley by 3:30 in the morning. At 58 years old, having built Vanguard's safety and compliance rating from 70% to 95%, I was being dismissed like a temp worker on 3 minutes of notice. I felt a deep wave of anger, but I forced my voice to remain calm. I understood his decision. I told him I would transfer the credentials as requested. When the call ended at 2:25, I sat back and looked at the monitors displaying real-time data from the 4 sites. The screens showed crane coordinates, environmental monitoring sensors, crew rotations, and weather radar. By 3:15, I had systematically transferred the administration privileges to Bradley Miller. At 3:23, my phone rang again. It was an internal company number, and when I answered, a young, confident voice introduced himself as Bradley. He sounded like a corporate climber who was completely out of his depth. He wanted a quick overview of the current status of the night operations. I looked at the monitors that I no longer had the right to access. I told him that my credentials had been revoked and that he would need to review the active project dashboards himself. He sounded startled, asking if there were any immediate concerns he should prioritize. I gave him a minimal, professional response. I told him to check the Odessa environmental permits, the pump maintenance in Corpus Christi, and the crew logistics in Tulsa. Bradley seemed lost. He asked if I could stay on the line to guide him through the system interface. I reminded him that as of 2:20, I was no longer an employee of Vanguard Construction. He was shocked, explaining that he did not expect to take over the operational management until the morning. He had not reviewed the ongoing projects or spoken to the site supervisors. I told him he would need to call Richard Croft to resolve his timing issues. After I hung up, I looked at the system alerts beginning to flash on my screen. The site supervisors were trying to contact me directly on my private number. I had no authority to help them anymore. I turned off my phone, walked out of my office, and went to bed. I lay there in the dark, my mind racing with thoughts of the field crews working without a net. To make matters worse, the night was exceptionally humid and the Texas air felt heavy. Vanguard had been my life. 19 years is a long time to spend at one company. You get to know every weld, every inspector, and every piece of heavy machinery. I knew that the Odessa line was running through a particularly sensitive watershed, meaning any regulatory slip-up would result in massive fines. The pump station in Corpus Christi was utilizing older equipment that required constant monitoring of pressure levels to prevent seal failure. In Tulsa, the local contractor crews were notoriously unionized and sensitive to scheduling changes. Bradley Miller was walking into a minefield without a map. He had a Master of Business Administration from a prestigious university, but that would not help him when a pipe manifold threatened to rupture. I closed my eyes, but I could not quiet the feeling that a massive storm was about to hit Vanguard, and I was no longer there to steer the ship. I woke up at 6:30 in the morning to the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the house. My wife, Helen, was already in the kitchen. We had been married for 31 years, and she knew my routines better than anyone. She looked at me, noticing immediately that I was not wearing my usual work shirt. I sat down at the table and poured myself a cup. I took a slow sip and told her the news. I told her that Richard Croft had fired me at 2:20 in the morning. Helen stopped what she was doing and stared at me in disbelief. She asked why they would do something so foolish when we were in the middle of the most critical phase of the pipeline installations. I told her they wanted to streamline operations and save money by hiring a younger vice president. Helen was furious. She reminded me of all the holidays I had missed, the late-night phone calls I had answered, and the weekends I had spent driving across the state to resolve construction crises. She was worried about our retirement plans and the medical expenses from her major surgery 2 years ago. We had spent so much of our savings on her recovery, and we had planned for me to work at least 7 more years to rebuild our nest egg. The thought of starting over at 58 was daunting, but Helen reached across the table and took my hand. She told me that we had faced worse challenges and that my experience was worth more than Vanguard realized. Her support gave me a sense of peace that I had not felt during that midnight phone call. We sat there for a long time, talking about the early days of our marriage. I remembered when I was in the Army Corps of Engineers, moving from base to base, and how she had managed our household with so much grace. When I transitioned to the private sector and joined Vanguard, it was supposed to be the stable foundation for our golden years. Now, with a single phone call, the chief executive officer had threatened that security. But looking at Helen, I realized that my value did not depend on Richard Croft's approval. My reputation was built on 19 years of concrete results, safe operations, and strong relationships with the inspectors and contractors who actually built the infrastructure. Even as we spoke, my phone was vibrating on the counter. When I turned it back on, I saw that I had received 20 missed calls and 35 text messages from site supervisors and project coordinators. They were panicking because they could not get hold of Bradley Miller. The night shift supervisors had run into issues, and the new vice president was not answering his phone. I ignored the messages. I was no longer their director, and helping them would only enable Richard's poor decision-making. I walked out to the back porch and watched the sun rise over our pasture, letting the quiet of the morning wash over me. The local birds were starting to sing, and for the first time in years, I did not feel the pressure of the morning operational updates. At 7:45, Richard Croft called my personal number. His tone was no longer cold and confident. He sounded desperate. He told me that they were experiencing some operational complications and needed my immediate assistance. I greeted him politely and reminded him that I was no longer an employee of Vanguard. He offered to pay me emergency consulting rates if I would come to the office to help Bradley get oriented. I declined his offer, telling him that I was already exploring other professional opportunities. I did not tell him that 2 of Vanguard's main competitors had already left messages on my voicemail. News travels fast in the pipeline industry, and everyone knew I was suddenly a free agent. One of those calls was from Peter Reynolds, the president of Pinnacle Infrastructure. Pinnacle was Vanguard's largest regional competitor, and Peter was a no-nonsense leader who valued field experience. He had heard about my departure through industry channels and wanted to discuss a partnership. Peter had spent the last 15 years building Pinnacle from a small, local firm into a powerhouse by treating his workers with respect and prioritizing hands-on expertise over corporate cost-cutting. He offered me the position of vice president of pipeline operations with an equity stake and the freedom to build my own team. He said he wanted someone who knew the ground, not a spreadsheet manager. I told him I was interested and agreed to meet him later that week. Meanwhile, Richard Croft called me twice more, offering to reinstate me with better terms. I told him that I would not return to a company that could eliminate 2 decades of service over a 5-minute phone call. I was done with Vanguard, and my focus was now on the future with Pinnacle. The collapse of Vanguard's operations took exactly 24 hours and 30 minutes. I watched the disaster unfold through text messages from my old crew members who were still on the sites. The first major blow occurred at 11:15 on Tuesday morning. The Odessa site was shut down by federal regulators after failing a critical environmental compliance inspection. Manuel Ortiz, who had been the supervisor at Odessa for 11 years, texted me to say that Bradley Miller had failed to prepare the proper environmental permits. The inspectors had issued a stop work order that would take weeks to resolve. Without the proper permit sequencing, the entire project was halted, costing Vanguard hundreds of thousands of dollars in daily delays. Bradley had tried to submit generic paperwork, not understanding that the local watershed regulations required specific, site-customized compliance logs. The federal inspectors had no patience for Bradley's excuses. Manuel told me that Bradley had tried to argue with the lead inspector, a man who had known me for 15 years and respected our adherence to the rules. By trying to bluster his way through the meeting, Bradley only succeeded in turning a minor documentation issue into a full shutdown. The crews were sent home, and the heavy machinery sat idle. The financial impact was immediate, as Vanguard was renting specialized equipment at massive rates, and the idle time was eating directly into their profit margins. The second crisis struck at 3:45 in the afternoon at the Corpus Christi site. A major pump at Pump Station 62 suffered a critical pressure failure. Roy Jenkins, our veteran equipment specialist, called me in a panic. He told me that Bradley was ordering them to bypass the safety protocols and restart the system. Roy knew that restarting the pump without the manual bypass procedure would destroy the $400,000 equipment and cause weeks of downtime. I told Roy that I could no longer give him operational directions and that he had to follow the chain of command. Roy was frustrated, but he refused to perform the dangerous restart without written authorization from the new vice president. Bradley, fearing the delay, signed the authorization anyway, and within 10 minutes, the entire pump station manifold ruptured. Taking the terminal offline, the rupture caused a minor leak that required immediate environmental mitigation. While the damage was contained, the local authorities were forced to shut down the main pipeline header, halting all oil shipments from the terminal. The cost of repair was significant, but the cost of the shutdown was astronomical, as major oil shippers began diverting their volume to competitor pipelines. Bradley was completely overwhelmed, unable to coordinate the repair crews or address the concerns of the terminal clients. By 5:50 in the afternoon, the Tulsa site had fallen into complete chaos. Bradley Miller had tried to reschedule the local contractor crews without consulting the lead coordinator, Keith Simmons. As a result, 4 different crews showed up at the same site, creating a massive logistical bottleneck. Carl Gibson, the owner of Gibson Construction, was furious. He had worked with me for 17 years and did not tolerate corporate incompetence. He threatened to pull his crews off the project entirely. By the evening, Vanguard's 4 major pipeline projects were operating at less than 30% capacity due to safety violations, regulatory shutdowns, and contractor disputes. The site supervisors were completely demoralized, and Bradley was in way over his head. In addition to these problems, a severe weather system began moving into Oklahoma. The Weather Service had issued a tornado watch for the county, adding to the extreme tension on the ground. In the past, I would have spent hours coordinating with site managers to secure heavy equipment, shut down open trenches, and evacuate crews. Under Bradley's lack of coordination, none of these precautions were taken. High winds and torrential rain battered the unsecured sites, causing trench collapses and thousands of dollars in property damage. It was a complete disaster from top to bottom, proving that spreadsheet management could not replace field awareness. My former assistant, Maria Torres, called me at 8:15 that night. She was in tears, describing the panic at the corporate headquarters in Dallas. She told me that Bradley was hiding in emergency meetings while the major clients, including Chevron and ExxonMobil, were demanding answers. Vanguard had missed its daily progress targets, and the penalty clauses in the contracts were about to kick in. Chevron alone was prepared to levy $300,000 per day in late fees. Maria asked me what we should do to fix the mess. I told her that it was no longer my responsibility, and that the new management would have to find a way to resolve the issues. I hung up the phone, feeling a mixture of sadness for the crews and a firm validation of my own worth. As the financial losses mounted, Richard Croft and Bradley Miller attempted to protect themselves by shifting the blame. They forged my signature on safety sign-off documents dated after my termination, attempting to make it look like I had approved the faulty operational procedures that led to the Corpus Christi pump failure and the Odessa environmental violations. Fortunately, Maria Torres discovered the forged documents in the company's shared database and immediately alerted me. I contacted my attorney and hired a certified forensic document examiner to analyze the digital signatures and file metadata. We compiled a comprehensive report proving that the documents were created and signed hours after my system access credentials had been officially revoked. My legal team filed a formal complaint in federal court, presenting the forensic evidence of the forgery under California Penal Code Section 470, which governed Vanguard's primary construction contracts. We demonstrated that the safety clearances were forged, rendering the agreements void ab initio. This legal doctrine meant the forged documents were legally void from the beginning and had no legal force. The revelation of the forgery destroyed Vanguard's defense. The federal regulators and our major energy clients realized that the corporate executives had attempted to cover up their own negligence by committing fraud. The court proceedings were swift, and the judge expressed severe disapproval of Vanguard's actions. The forensic examiner was able to show that the electronic signatures were generated using an administrative master key that only the executive office possessed, and the IP address of the device that uploaded the documents matched Bradley Miller's office computer. The timestamp on the files showed they were uploaded at 4 p.m. on Friday, 3 days after I had been dismissed. Facing this irrefutable proof, Vanguard's legal counsel had no choice but to advise the company that they could not defend the validity of the safety logs. The federal judge immediately ordered the documents stricken from the record, leaving Vanguard fully exposed to regulatory citations and contract violations. We also subpoenaed the internal communication logs from Vanguard's corporate servers, which revealed emails between Richard Croft and Bradley Miller discussing the plan. Croft had written that they needed to find a way to shift the liability of the failed inspection and pump rupture to me, or else the company's insurers would refuse to cover the multi-million-dollar claims. Miller had replied that he could easily modify the templates in the database and apply my old digital certificate. This paper trail of electronic correspondence proved premeditated intent to commit fraud. It was a smoking gun that left the company's defense lawyers completely speechless. When the federal prosecutor reviewed these emails alongside the examiner's report, they instantly initiated criminal proceedings. During the deposition of Bradley Miller, our attorney pressed him on the details of the uploads. Bradley quickly crumbled under the intense questioning, admitting that Richard Croft had ordered the falsification of the records. Bradley had sat in the deposition room, sweating profusely, trying to adjust his collar. His hands were shaking as our attorney presented the email printouts. He looked at his own defense lawyers, but they only stared at the table. He knew his career was over. He confessed that they were desperate to cover up the Corpus Christi disaster to prevent Chevron from terminating the contract and suing Vanguard for gross negligence. This confession was recorded in the official court transcript, making it impossible for Vanguard to deflect responsibility. The fallout was immediate and devastating for Vanguard. Chevron and ExxonMobil issued formal notices of contract review, citing breach of trust and operational failure. They canceled their active agreements with Vanguard and began looking for alternative contractors to complete the pipeline projects. The board of directors held an emergency meeting, and within 48 hours, Richard Croft and Bradley Miller were suspended pending a full criminal investigation into the forgery. The company's stock price plummeted, and their reputation in the industry was completely ruined. I watched the news from my kitchen table, feeling a sense of relief that the truth had been exposed. The legal system had served as a powerful tool to protect my reputation and expose their deceit. Furthermore, the public revelation of the forgery sent shockwaves through the regional oil and gas sector. Vanguard subcontractors began demanding immediate payment, fearing the company would file for bankruptcy. Several key suppliers ceased shipments of steel piping and valves, freezing all remaining work on the inactive project sites. The company's credit rating was downgraded to junk status by major financial agencies, making it impossible for Vanguard to secure the bonding required for future public bids. The board tried to issue statements promising a thorough internal audit, but the damage was irreversible. The clients had already moved on, and the federal prosecutors were preparing a formal indictment against Richard and Bradley for document falsification and regulatory fraud. 3 weeks after my termination from Vanguard, I walked into the Dallas headquarters of Pinnacle Infrastructure as their new vice president of pipeline operations. Peter Reynolds welcomed me and gave me the authority to rebuild the division from the ground up. My first call was to Manuel Ortiz, who immediately resigned from Vanguard to join my team. Within a month, Roy Jenkins, Keith Simmons, and Maria Torres had all followed, leaving Vanguard without the core personnel who kept their operations running. Even Carl Gibson brought his construction crews over to Pinnacle, refusing to work with Vanguard ever again. With a team of seasoned professionals, Pinnacle quickly took control of the market. We secured the contract for the $600 million Trans-Texas pipeline project, a massive deal that I had spent 3 years developing for Vanguard before they fired me. Our operations flourished, generating over $1.2 billion in annual revenue. Meanwhile, Vanguard struggled to find qualified personnel. 9 months after my firing, the board of directors replaced Richard Croft and sold Vanguard to a national firm for 75% below its peak valuation. The industry analysts specifically cited the loss of key personnel and the forgery scandal as the causes of Vanguard's collapse. We established a new operational standard at Pinnacle, prioritizing safety and compliance above all else. The team members who had followed me from Vanguard were given better pay, better benefits, and most importantly, the respect they deserved. Manuel Ortiz took over our West Texas operations. Roy Jenkins was put in charge of our marine terminals, and Keith Simmons coordinated our interstate projects. Maria Torres managed our project administration, ensuring that our documentation was always flawless and compliant. The synergy of our team was unmatched, and within a year, Pinnacle had become the dominant player in the region, winning praise from regulators and energy clients alike. Our success culminated in Pinnacle achieving a 99% safety and compliance rating during our annual audit, the highest ever recorded in the company's history. Chevron and ExxonMobil were so impressed with our transition and execution that they awarded Pinnacle their Infrastructure Contractor of the Year award. I hosted a celebratory dinner for the entire field crew and office staff, thanking them for their loyalty and dedication. It was a proud moment, showing that true quality is built on the hard work of people, not just executive policies. In the years that followed, Pinnacle Infrastructure continued to expand, opening new regional offices in Denver and Oklahoma City. We became the go-to contractor for complex, high-pressure gas transmission systems. The equity stake Peter Reynolds had given me grew in value, ensuring that Helen and I would never have to worry about financial security. The medical bills that had once seemed like a heavy burden were now a distant memory. I was able to establish a scholarship fund for young engineers from working-class backgrounds, helping them get the hands-on education that is so often ignored in today's corporate world. We proved that a company could be highly profitable while maintaining the highest safety standards and treating its workforce with dignity. Vanguard's assets were purchased by a conglomerate that immediately dismantled the brand name, erasing all traces of the company that Richard Croft's father had spent 40 years building. It was a sobering reminder of how quickly a legacy can be destroyed by arrogant management. Croft himself was barred from serving as an officer in any public company, and Bradley Miller was forced to pay heavy restitution fees. One evening, Helen and I were sitting on our back porch, watching the sunset over the fields. My phone buzzed with a message from Peter Reynolds congratulating us on completing another successful project ahead of schedule. Helen smiled and remarked that Richard Croft had fired me to save money, only to lose his company and watch us build his biggest competitor into a dominant force. She was right. I did not have to sabotage Vanguard or seek revenge. I simply took my expertise to a place where it was valued and let the natural consequences of their incompetence play out. In the end, the best revenge was not anger, but excellence and a secure retirement. We sat there in the fading light, listening to the quiet sounds of the evening. The transition had been stressful, but it had proven that real capability cannot be replaced by corporate jargon or cheap alternatives. Pinnacle had given me the respect and authority I deserved, and the results spoke for themselves. I looked at the old Vanguard safety report I kept on my desk, a reminder of what was lost when executives forgot the value of hands-on experience. Some lessons are indeed too expensive to teach twice, and Vanguard had paid the ultimate price for theirs. I raised my coffee cup toward the horizon, content in the knowledge that our future was secure, and my reputation remained intact. The legal system and my professional integrity had combined to deliver a silent, devastating retort to the corporate greed that had sought to discard me.